So hello and welcome to the second part of this eduroam training. My name is Marko Remija and I'm coming from Serbian NREN Amres. Amres is also the NRO or National Roaming Operator for eduroam. So we can start by talking about radius, but I'm not going to take too much time if everyone here has heard about it. Has anyone had a chance to work with radius protocol? Yes, no? So, yeah. Well, then I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this protocol, but it's the underlying protocol that eduroam is based on, basically. So it's a classical client-server protocol, and I have to say that in this terminology, the client is not the user's machine. And the client can be, for example, a network access server, which can be either a .1x switch or a wireless access point or something else, which we'll see on the next slides. It's also the authentication AAA protocol, which means that it enables authentication, authorization, and accounting. Authentication, well, Mira talked about that yesterday. It actually enables users to authenticate at their home institution. And authorization is the part where they gain access to the whole network or parts of the network, depending on whether or not the SP is using or it's not using a dynamic VLAN in their network. And Radius is a very old protocol, and it has been defined in two RFCs, namely 2865 and 2866. So I encourage you, if you're having trouble to understand and comprehend everything around Radius protocol, to take a look at these RFCs, and especially if you're having trouble sleeping. These are pretty boring documents, I must say, but they're very informative. And you should try to read them and try to understand everything that's going around. So Radius RFC 2865 is mainly for authentication part, and RFC 2866 is for accounting part. So when talking about Radius authentication, here we can see how the communication between two Radius clients, or as I mentioned, a Radius client in this aspect is not just is not users and machine. It's either a network access server or another Radius server. So actually, there are three types of messages in Radius authentication. These are access requests, which happen when the users want to connect first to a network, to a wireless network. Then, if the network is or actually, if the wireless LAN is EAP enabled, and if EAP authentication is used, there's a access challenge message, which triggers the exchange of keying material. And in the end, if everything goes as expected, the user should gain access to a network or a part of the network, as I've mentioned. But of course, if his credentials, username, password, or in case of FTLS certificate are not valid, then they will not gain access to the network. When we're talking about Radius accounting messages, there are actually just two types of messages. These are accounting request messages and accounting response messages, but both of these messages have three subtypes, or actually accounting request has three subtypes. So that's accounting start message, which is triggered by Radius client, and then the Radius server sends the accounting response message. Then in between, if session is open, Radius client can also ping or ask from the Radius server to send the interim update message, which updates the data or, for example, number of octets that have been exchanged during the session. And then the server responds again with a counting response message. There's also when user wants to end his session or when he closes his laptop or disconnects, there's the accounting stop type message. Generally, various accounting messages are good for two reasons. When talking about commercial telcos, they can use them to charge their users for, I don't know how much bandwidth they've used. You can, for example, limit the validity of the session, for example, for 8 hours while the users are at work or, I don't know, at faculty or something else. And in case of eduroam, you can use those messages to pinpoint to a user which has, for example, created some security incident, but we're going to talk about that a bit later. So this is one of my favorite pictures when I talk about Radius protocol. Why? Because here you can see how widely deployed Radius has been since its beginnings. Miro mentioned yesterday, yeah, you can use Radius for dial-up, which is very, very old technology. But recently, we decided we still had our dial-up connections active, and we had just a couple of users. And of course, when we decided that we do not want to pay for the leased line, we of course had some complaints about why did you terminate this service when I was using it? And we're like, you know, this is 21st century, 56K modem, you know. And what's even more interesting, it was even easier to pay, for example, for just those two users ADSL connection than to keep this lease line alive. So yeah, Radius can be really, really useful and was useful earlier, but as I said, it has been used and it's still being used. Radius also can be used for VPN servers. For example, as we're also lacking a bit of human resources, we're trying to use as much of equipment and configuration as we can. So we practically cloned the eduroam hierarchy and deployed it for our VPN service. So that's something you should maybe think about also. But nevertheless, the part we're talking about in eduroam and which is most important is this right-hand side of the picture. As Miro mentioned, you just need to have network devices that are .1x capable, and they can be either wireless access points or they can be also standard network layer 2 equipment. They just need to be .1x enabled, and yeah, as Miro said, those are probably I don't know if there are any other use cases than this, but yeah, probably the biggest deployment of this kind of topology is in Carnet or Srce, I'm not sure. And most other institutions use just wireless access points to enable their users to connect to eduroam. So this is what Miro also mentioned yesterday, but I think it won't harm to repeat it again. So basically, in order for users to be able to connect to eduroam, they have to have a user device that's .1x capable, and the access point has to be .1x capable. And actually, IEEE 802 defines EP over LAN, or in short, EPOL, and it describes 3 elements. So as we've said yesterday, it's authenticator, which is actually the NAS, the switch or the access point. Then we have authentication server, which is Radius server in this case, and it's authenticating users. and at the end we have a supplicant, which is a part of software that you probably don't see, or if someone has maybe tried to find it or to modify it, it sits on almost or basically on all end user devices. So again, here is something similar to similar picture to what Miro showed yesterday, without the nice switch thingy. So as I mentioned, so you have a supplicant or .1x enabled client, which is a user's device, which can be, of course, a laptop, a mobile phone, and so on. I think that there have been some tries to enable Xbox and something else to connect to eduroam, but I'm not sure. Of course, now I hope you will follow the eduroam development list, and these guys are really great and do a great work along with Miro. There are Tomasz Wolniewicz, Stefan Winter, Paul Deckers, and many others. And they always try to keep with the pace of developing new devices. And for example, Tomasz found out that there's now an Apple Watch which can use wireless to connect to the mobile phone. And the joke is, it's just a matter of time when users will start asking, how do I connect my Apple Watch to eduroam? Which is, at the moment, obviously not possible. So then we have the authenticator, or .1x switch, or AP. And as I mentioned, the communication between supplicant and authenticator is equal or IP over LAN. And then at this point, IP messages are encapsulated into Radius protocol and transferred to the authentication server, no matter what the intranet or network topology is here. Please, if you have any questions, if you want to stop me, if I'm talking too fast, too slow, just tell me. So I would like now to go to the part we're all waiting, and especially when talking about hands-on. So Miro already mentioned yesterday that there are two roles that an institution can take. That's service provider and identity provider. So each eduroam enabled institution can use different equipment. In this case, I'm talking about the part that is in .1x called authenticator. They can use different software and different topology. What it means is, for example, today we're going to use FreeRADIUS, which I find very nice. Maybe a bit complicated at the start, but when you manage to find your way around, it's very easy to use, and besides being modular, it's very configurable. The other types of Radius servers that can be used are, as far as I know, Radier, which is a paid solution, and Microsoft MPS IaaS, yeah. And the topology of the network, as I mentioned before, the internet part is actually, it doesn't matter if everything is configured correctly. That part is almost should be transparent to the end user. So the details of the eduroam configuration depend of all the details that all the elements that were mentioned above, but the broad principles have to remain the same. Nevertheless, which technology is used. But there are some things we have to mention, and we have to warn users about. Even though eduroam can be considered as just a wireless network, it's not really that simple. Yeah, it consists of different maybe very simple technologies, but together they create a complete service that sometimes can be very complex. And you have to know how to configure your wireless devices or wireless LANs, and you cannot just say, okay, I have a wireless access point, I'm going to create an SSID eduroam, and it's going to work magically without taking care about what you've configured. And if the SSID eduroam doesn't perform, it's not just, for example, in US network, people are going to complain. For example, if you have visitors like Miro and I, when we come here and our connection doesn't work, yeah, of course, we're going to complain. We're expecting it to work. But great, it works, so we won't complain to anyone. Just to show you how big eduroam now is, I've seen this link, I don't know, maybe in eduroam steering group or on mailing lists. But this, you can check it. I'll send the slides later, but you can check this link, which lists the most used SSIDs globally. So bear with me that the total amount of eduroam SSIDs in the whole world is now at 0.21%, which is great considering that we have, for example, generic SSIDs like Linksys, no SSID, Android AP. So if you would eliminate all those, for example, I would call them generic SSIDs, eduroam would climb even higher. I think last year the SSID eduroam was 17th most used SSID, and it was at 0.20%. But for 1 year, it has grown for 0.01%, which is not a lot, but it has enabled the eduroam SSID to climb up to 16. I think it's 16th. I don't know. I can't count right now, but if you want it, I think it's at number 16 right now.
How do they count the statistics?
I'm not sure. Really, I don't have an answer, but probably, I don't know, Mira?
No, actually, but it's a PR-ish thing. So whenever you see something that does some global metering, you have to take it with grain
Pinch of salt.
un grano salis, what Latvians would say. So by this actually indicates that aside of Boingo and some other well-known global SSIDs, eduroam actually is recognized. Yeah, you should take it seriously.
So, pardon I would like to excuse for the language shown here, but we mentioned that eduroam is really a global brand, and if something isn't configured correctly, you're going to have a lot of users that complain, and some of them are not really being very nice. So yeah, you have to take care when you configure SSID eduroam, because not only you're going to have trouble with your own users, but what can happen is that you can have problems also with foreign users. And yeah, you're definitely going to hurt the global brand. So the quote of the day, the quote that came to my mind when thinking about how big or how important eduroam now is and how you should treat it, is that with great power comes great responsibility. I have to admit I didn't know whose quote was this, so I Googled around, and it turns out it's Spider-Man. Yeah, some say the Spider-Man said that, but yeah, I'm not sure. But never mind, at least he's into webs. So you probably got the eduroam workbook, and we're going to use that workbook to configure or to try to configure some things that are needed for you to create SP, IDP, SP server, IDP server, or maybe both. And when I'm talking about equipment that should be used, it should be probably state-of-the-art or enterprise level equipment with 802.11 AC or N standards. The vendors that fall into the enterprise level category are Cisco, HP, which is now I think called Aruba, Aero, Ruckus, and so on. I'm not sure whether or not all of these are present in eduroam, but I can confirm that Cisco is working great. I'm not sure. I think Paul.
I can confirm for the rest. So.
Yeah. So coming from the experts, yeah.
Whenever buying equipment for eduroam, please keep in mind that you are buying it for the next 5 or 7 years. Okay? So don't buy something that is all ready, because what will happen is it will become obsolete, and you actually rely on the fact that the supplier will provide the updates for the firmware and so on and so on. If you buy something old, it will go out of the market, and then you are more or less doomed. You have no possibility to maintain the equipment. And when it comes to the enterprise level, the fact is you can buy very cheap access points. They say, okay, it works with everyone. It has 1.x, so it works. But then you have to plan for capacity. This means that this access point at the home network has to survive 20 users who are surfing, watching video, and so on and so on. And if it breaks, eduroam is broken. It's not eduroam broken, it's your wireless network broken. This is the reason why we say enterprise level access point. Because if you're going to support, let's say, students in the university, students are young people who want to learn, who want to see, check. If they rely on internet, if they use Wi-Fi, you are in trouble. 50 users, your access points can't survive. So plan the capacity for the network. Not only the number of users, 50 users, nice, but plan the capacity. And for that, it's important to have a good equipment. Just a word of caution, because I've been there, I've known the mistakes we did 10 or 4 years ago, so why repeat somebody else's mistakes?
Yeah, we also had an institution that was very proud. They said we bought, I don't know, 100, 200 access points, and we were very happy because of that. And we asked them, well, which equipment did you buy? And they said Linksys. So yeah, it's great. It could be considered as the great access point in the home access point category, but it cannot be used for eduroam because it probably doesn't scale, as Miro said.
Again, for the professional Wi-Fi setup. So think about the eduroam as a king in the cave. You set up very good Wi-Fi, and on top of that you put eduroam as authentication and authorization mechanism. Because if you don't have a solid Wi-Fi, adding some more into it would just make it worse. Bad cave with a good cave, still bad cave. So do plan your Wi-Fi. Do talk to your network engineers. Make sure that you have enough of addresses, IP4, IPv6, whatever. If you install the NAT, make sure that you keep the logs and so on. It's also the networking business, not only the...
I can also confirm what Miro said, especially regarding the DHCP pool, because it happened to us. Yeah, I must admit, I'm not very happy about that, but DHCP starvation happens, and it happens when you're not planning well. And it happened to us a couple of times, and you have a lot of things to debug to get to the point where you are sure that it's not the radius, it's not the backend database that's not working, but it's not the wireless equipment that's not working. It is working, but the DHCP pool has been starved. So you cannot get an IP address, or you get it for a fraction of a second, and then someone else logs in, and you again lose your connection. So that's bad. So be careful when
in the community, imagine you have 50 people around, and your DHCP pool is 40. Okay? So first 40 get the IP address, and the least time is, let's say, 2 hours. And the other 10, and that is randomly, whoever was faster gets the IP address. And the other 10 cannot connect. Actually, it says same user cannot connect because he is marked as the offensive one. So be careful. Setting up the wireless network is really an important job. Planning for the future. If you have a big event like this, then DHCP pool has to be as much as it is needed. Otherwise, you will have some professor from somewhere saying this is not working for me. The other would say, it works perfectly. Yeah, what is the problem?
Yeah, so
like DHCP is one on the list of the problems that we had earlier. DHCP is on the top 10 table.
Yeah.
The first is, of course, wrong username in the password. Okay, that's the first. But somewhere in the top is DHCP pool. So plan your network. Normally, I mean, it depends on the habits of your users, but normally, for instance, for the networking conference, the shunt is organized. You have 400 people, and at certain points of time, 600 devices connected to the eduroam network. Because some people are crazy enough to have 2 or more devices at the same time, and they're both connected. So think about this, plan your network. This is the message. This was just a jokes to, let you remind the thing that planning is a good stuff. I mean, you planned already your wired network. Wireless is a bit more thinking around. The release time of the DHCP is also interesting stuff. Would you put it for 2 hours or 12 hours? Yeah. There is no best practice in the world. It really depends on your network. Sorry for intrusion.
no, thank you. That was helpful also. So another thing that eduroam needs, of course, is radius server, which can be FreeRADIUS or radiator radius server. I didn't list here the Windows NPS or IAS because there have been some trouble in our community also with some radius attributes that Windows Server cannot understand, and that causes actually practically create your users are left without service. How do I know that? Well, one of students from one of our universities went to Scotland, and he wanted to use eduroam there, and he was like, okay, it's working. I mean, I authenticate, but I don't get an IP address. So it was a problem that was a bit more complicated to solve because we needed to contact his home institution and then verify what went wrong. And after a lot of debugging and testing from the command line, which I don't recommend, I concluded that it's the operator name attribute that basically gets to the radius server. Radius server does not expect that kind of attributes with that number, and just silently discards the request, and then the server becomes unavailable for a period of 5 minutes. So it's not just that one user that's without the service, it's the whole constituency. So
saying about chat conference with
Yep.
number of people who has more than one device. Is it possible to authenticate 2 devices with 1 login?
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, well, my laptop is in my bag, but I'm authenticated with the same account on my mobile and on my laptop. So.
How to prevent? The question is why to prevent? Because, again, you have geeks. I want to connect my phone and my photo. And you have even worse cases in which I have a tablet in my bag. And I also want to connect with that. So the question is why to prevent it? But the answer is the radius is powerful tool. It also has the accounting records. And what you get is some reference to. But because we are using outer identity, you must not do it with the outer identity. Okay? Yeah. The outer identity is anonymous. So you can do it at the service level, or you can do it at the identity provider. don't advise to use accounting packets because accounting packets are not reliable one. Since the days of dial-up, we all know that actually sometimes stop packet is not coming. Thus, you will penalize the user because he has never stopped one connection to start the other. The telcos used to just do after 4 hours of work. If the connection is stalled, they just stopped immediately. Because for telcos, it's important to send you the bill, how much you are on the net. But here, nobody sends the bill. So who cares about the accounting packets? I know it sounds rough, but actually for eduroam, international eduroam, cross-border eduroam, we don't advise to use accounting packets. So IDP side is broken, and the SP side on the other side, what can you do? There is MAC address, okay, but MAC address of device. There is outer identity, but you cannot rely on that. The only thing is there is chargeable user identity. There's a special attribute that is being, if the service provider may start the request for it, and the identity provider sends it back. So then you know it's that user, it's cache for the user. If you have a nasty user in the net, then with that chargeable user identity, you can block all his devices immediately. Because this chargeable user identity is the hash of his real identity. So you can block somebody. But only with the CUI, chargeable user identity, CUI. That's the name of the radius attribute actually. It is recommended in the eduroam but not mandatory.
Yeah.
So if you want, you can set up your national network with using chargeable user identity. We do it in Croatia. But that means you have to, it's combined with the operator name. So the operator, the ESP has to present itself, okay, I'm operator, I don't know, Academy of Sciences in Yerevan, and then the identity provider will send back for you, this is the identifier of this user. This is the hash. It's hash. It's a lot of symbols, lot of numbers and letters. And you can use it, and then on the level of service provider, you can block the user.
So I can write a virus which will authenticate me 100 times, and I will kill all the.
I don't know how you're going to do it, but essentially you can try to do that. I wouldn't say it will work, but okay.
But actually, I think that some commercial telcos can and use some radius attributes that limit the number of devices with the same username that can connect to the network. I'm not sure. I forgot
There are some mechanisms, but
Yeah.
again, you have to be very careful not to block people because they are using anonymous ASNet.
Yeah, I mean
they can use that as the alter identity.
that sounds nice when you're a telco and you want to limit the bandwidth someone is using, but how can you impose such I don't know, how can you make a user not use more than one device in academic environment? You know, you might want to connect, I don't know, 3 laptops for some testing and you need internet connection. And where's the line where you say, okay, I now want to limit the number of users for students, the number of devices for students, 1 or 2. You know, that's the problem when you're using the eduroam service. You don't know how many devices one can have. I mean, yeah, there are some anomalies. You usually don't want to see a user with 20 different MAC addresses connected to eduroam because then something might be wrong. But actually 3, 5, you know, I myself haven't found the way to say, okay, this is too much. I'm going to limit or tell the service provider to limit usage for this user to 5 MAC addresses.
More complicated thing. I will do VPN to my home institute, authenticate there and here, so I will be in different countries at the same time.
Who cares anymore? I mean,
Why would you do that? Well, you already have an internet connection. Why would you?
I mean, for hacking, okay, you can sight of what's going on in your wireless network, and then you react. So
I mean that in bank, if you are do banking from two different countries, bank think that something is wrong.
again, it's up to the IDPs or SPs to enforce their policies. We are open and we, by the lowest ground, we don't impose anything. But if you want, you can add additional measures, no problem. But then again, you have to be careful not to, like putting firewalls and then being too restrictive, because the wall has a problem. You don't want others see you, so you put a big wall in front of you. But then you don't see outside. That's also the problem. You start making holes in the wall to see, and then wall collapses. So be careful about putting some constraints on the net, because it might be more work to do, and then the real result, God knows if it is good enough. Again, diagnostics tools and reading the logs would help. So if you ask for diagnostic tools, that is better question, and also we don't have a good answer here. Some of the companies like Arrowhead, they would provide you good software, and in that software you see the health of each and every of your access point, wherever it is. So from this building you can control all Arrowhead. Thousands of access points. Okay, you pay for that software. But this software really tells the access point, second floor, this corner has a problem with electricity. You can see the number of attached clients and everything else. So these kind of tools will actually help you to sit like in the spaceship and control all of your devices across the globe. If you are not to buy something, then you have to read the logs. That's the fact of life. Yes,
Sorry for about this software. This software will be independent providers and manufacturer.
I'm not sure. I know about the Arrowhead. I have seen Cisco software, I've seen Arrowhead software, but I cannot guarantee there are. For sure there are the others. Maybe Aruba has something, I presume they have, but I can't, comment on something that I haven't seen. But there are also some open source solutions. Depends on, we are building some kind of probing system inside the cat and inside of that. Maybe I could show you later if we have time. But there are some systems which allow you to control. They use SNMP among other things, but really, you have to check each and every tool. The matter is that sometimes they insist on buying the same equipment. So Cisco, in earlier days, had that famous wireless LAN controller. And for that you have to buy their own, sorry Cisco, you have to buy their own access points. And then they introduced the new version of the wireless LAN controller, but the new version worked only with the new access points. And all access points, all the way good, you can throw them away. So what happened? You buy this refurbished old access points because you have the old access controller. They did a mistake there. So you have to be careful. That's about the procurement and of the wireless equipment. That's the actually for the network. To make sure that it all fits together with your network. And, but I would advise, if you plan for the big coverage, to think about this network access control hardware and software, because that would make your life easier.
Will something change if I will build my network as LDAP?
I think no. No, because this is the lower level. I mean, the wireless is the thing of itself. But again, if you have a small installation, 20 access points in your institution, then it's easier to control. But if it is different buildings, what can you do? They say it's not working. Cisco when buying equipment, you could have a look at that. Maybe some of the commercial solutions are okay with it. But then also take into account what kind of access points are to be used. Some of these solutions actually say, okay, whatever access point just has to be this kind of standards followed. Some are very strict, as I said, or used to be very strict. Only these models. And this is not so good, because then if the model is outdated, then all of your installation.
Yeah, that's true. Because we have a wireless Cisco controller now, and the old equipment is practically unusable, but I think there are some workarounds where you can create a tunnel between the old and the new ones, and then you practically still have that seamless roaming, which is actually the point of eduroam, when you roam between two access points or two buildings, that you can keep your connection. But yeah, I can confirm that the older models, I think Cisco 1142, on the older wireless LAN controller with older, of course, version of firmware do not work or cannot be connected to the new Cisco controller. But yeah, there are some workarounds. We still haven't tested it, and I cannot say if it works or not. But if we manage to do something about it, I'll probably send an update through eduroam SG or on the mailing list so everyone can see it. And besides having the equipment and the Radius server, this setup, of course, assumes that there are already ETLRs or European top-level Radius servers present, as well as Federation-level Radius, which we have confirmed because Mir and I are connected to eduroam. So I presume you have already all started your VMs that you were provided. And now we can get to the part finally where we can use our fingers a bit. And I think it's going to be a bit more interesting than just talking. So when setting up Radius server, first we're going to create clients for the SP Radius server. And you connect clients, how? By defining them in the clients.conf file. And then you have to configure the proxy servers, because SP in this aspect is actually not authenticating users right now. We'll get to the point where this same server will be both IDP and SP, but at this point in time it's not authenticating users, so it just needs to proxy the requests of other users to Federation-level Radius servers, which will then know where to proxy next those requests, or they will proxy it to the user's identity provider based on the routing table. So as Miro said, we can call it routing table. It's not routing table in the networking sense, but it's routing table meaning that the Federation-level Radius has all the realms of the IDPs defined, and when a request is received with a certain realm that belongs to that NRO or that IDP, it's proxied all the way down to the IDP, which authenticates the user. And by the end of this session, or maybe we're going to have to move it to the next session, I'm going to try a live demo with eduroam cat and show you how do you configure a profile for your home institution. I strongly advise each IDP to use eduroam cat because it helps a lot. It lowers the number of complaints you have from your users, like this is not working for me, where do I install my certificate, where do I find the certificate, my username is not working, my password is not working, and so on. Actually, that part you have to handle, but you know that at that point it's not about the supplicant that's causing the trouble, it's either a wrong username or wrong password. So the one thing you don't have to think about when setting service provider is setting IP, which requires public infrastructure to be used. This is good news for now, but when you if you want to install FreeRADIUS server or compile it on your own, I myself prefer using installing from source. Why? Because some of the distributions, like for example CentOS, which I used, do not ship the newest versions so fast. They take a lot of time. There were recently some developments regarding that in FreeRADIUS community, and some RPM files have been enabled for use. I've tested that also. It also works, so it's a matter of preference if you would like to use installing from source or using RPM packages. So compiling, I don't know how many of you have worked with Linux? Most, none, all? Okay. Okay, so if you've ever installed any software from source, you know that these are the three mostly used commands. Here, I would advise you to use the help switch when using configure command, which can help you find out which things you can modify. There are default prefix and default sysconfig dir, which I've used here in these VMs that you have, in these VMs that you have, followed by make install. So this is all you need to set up an SP. After you install the FreeRADIUS, you should, of course, this is the so to say environmental variable that says where the radiusd directory is stored. Radiusd directory is actually the main directory of the FreeRADIUS code, and it stores a lot of modules and other configuration items, which we'll talk about later. And when editing, you can use Vir or your text editor of preference. So as we mentioned more than once yesterday and today, the first thing to do is to define the clients. So NAS devices act as clients to Radius. Network access server is the short, NAS is the short for network access server, but not only wireless access points or .1x switches are considered as Radius clients. Some other Radius servers can also be considered as Radius clients, which we have seen yesterday. For example, ETLR is a client for for top-level Radius server. Top-level Radius server is considered as a client for service provider, and so on. Each client has to be defined using the client clause. And when defining clients, this is, of course, the syntax only for FreeRADIUS. The syntax depends and is different depending on the Radius software that you are using. And each client has to have defined a shared secret. Shared secret is a parameter that helps communication between two Radius clients in a way that they can confirm, signing the messages that they exchange, that they haven't been tampered with. So they can confirm that everything is fine, and if there are differences between those, so to say, encrypted messages, if they do not match, the communication is silently discarded. So you do not have any information about what has happened, but that can be considered maybe good, instead of letting someone move around your network or change even something else or create a man-in-the-middle attack. This is the crucial part. The shared secret is a crucial part of client clause. But defining clients can include a lot more. So I didn't know the IP addresses until now, so you can disregard this. So if you have, for example, a group of access points, you can use the IP address, and you can then match it with a subnet mask. So that means that, for example, you can use the next 16 or actually 14 IP addresses for your clients. Then there's the shared secret parameter, as I already mentioned. Of course, it should never be this easy to guess. Then there's the require message authenticator message, and these messages again are generated based on the shared secret parameter. Then you can use short name. Short name is actually just for your convenience. If you have many clients, it would be easier for you to debug something if you can find that client easier. If you just leave it the same as it says here, it would probably be a lot more. It would probably take a lot more time to find the client that was causing trouble. So you should probably use something that's how to say it, that's intuitive, that helps you find it faster. And then there's the NAS type directive. Usually when defining virtual servers, you leave it at other. But if you're using a specific kind of equipment, for example, NAS type can be Cisco, Juniper, I think Aruba, and others. Please, you can take a look at the configuration file. And at the end, of course, there's the virtual server, eduroam. What that means is that all the requests that are received from that client will go through the eduroam virtual server. And actually, that virtual server is responsible for processing Radius. I'm going to talk about how the requests are proxied through the Radius hierarchy. So when forwarding requests from SPs to from service provider Radius to federation level Radius, it's based on the at suffix part of the username. So for example, if you have anonymous at snet.am, the service provider will realize that it's not in charge of that user and will proxy the request based on that realm. The federation level Radius will then proxy that request based on the realm to the IDP, which will authenticate the user and return the result of authentication to the SP. If you're interested, again, you can read the RFC 4282, which defines the NI realm, how the NI realm is formed. Also, when talking about proxy.conf, there are three directives. That's home server pool, and realm. And the suffix is used to decide how the request will be processed. So now on the left-hand side, you see an example proxy.conf. Oh, sorry. An example proxy.conf, yeah. So this is the proxy.conf used by the service provider, for example.
I want one
Yeah.
question to
Please do.
clarify. If you will go back to, again, to the previous slide. So when we configure the client and
Yep.
we are mentioning our top
Yep.
level servers, it is the purpose is to accept the authorization or the connection from other places via the top server. Yes?
So yes and no. When we're talking about service provider doesn't authenticate anybody. It just provides the service.
To accept
Yeah.
the
And
connection.
it proxies the requests to top level Radius. So this is SP. So when you define a client that's federation level Radius, that means that service provider will be able to forward the requests for the realms to the federation level Radius, which will then forward the request to corresponding IDP.
I think for this that we measured, it should
Yeah.
be
Yeah, yeah.
And as a client, it is needed only to accept the
Yeah,
coming
yeah.
text.
Yeah, you're
That
right,
is
you're
what
right.
I wanted to understand.
So yeah. When configuring clients, you're just defining the clients that will be able to communicate with the federation level radius. It still doesn't do anything. You just say, okay, these two clients are able to communicate, to exchange to exchange radius requests.
So
To
anyway,
your SP,
Yeah.
all the access points are clients to your SP. And your SP radius is client
Client to the top level.
top level proxy.
but top level proxy also is a client for me
Yeah.
when it comes to the accepting the upper
Yes.
Yeah.
When it comes, yeah.
So what we did just now, it is registering top levels as a clients to accept some connections from outside.
Yeah.
Because the traffic goes up and goes down.
Yeah. Basically, you said.
It must go downwards from the top level downwards to your SP. Otherwise, SP would never learn the answer to it.
Basically, you said I trust this client to send me requests,
Yes.
and it's both ways.
Once you are server, once you are client.
So this is an example, proxy.conf again. You should change the addresses here. So I tried to depict how the processing of requests happen in proxy.conf. So, for example, when Miro and I came here, we had anonymous at some realm which is not a local realm. And what does the radius server do? Okay, you go to the proxy.conf. It knows that it's not a local client. Goes here, checks the realm. If there's such a realm, at the moment there's not such a realm, and there's just the realm default. What that means is that all the realms that are coming to this service provider radius will be matched with default realm. And then when this matching happens, then there's a pool eduroam defined. I'll talk about this in a second, but I want to underline this part. No strip. No strip means that this radius server won't strip the at realm part, which is important because that's exactly the way that radius servers are proxying requests in eduroam. So when we have a pool eduroam defined, then the request goes here and sees that there are two home server pools that correspond to the name eduroam. That's top level domain 1 Armenia and top level domain 2 Armenia. And also there is this directive type failover. I think Miro mentioned that already yesterday, but the one characteristic of Radius protocol is that it enables failover up to 256 clients. And now, if the first server is active, the request will be proxied there. And then here you can see that authentication and accounting are defined for this type of server. You can see the IP address of the server. You can see here the port 1812. That's the default radius port. But when you say here in the when you define the type of the server, which is authentication plus accounting, automatically port 1813 for radius accounting is added, and the radius server will listen on that port also. We already mentioned the shared secret parameter. You know what's that for, and the other timers here, except status server, are used to define how much will radius server, for example, wait for a response, how much will it take to revive the server after it's marked dead or zombie, how much time will it take to send the checks, and number of answers to mark the server alive again. Status server is very important part of this configuration because it enables other radius servers to, so to say, ping other radius clients and verify if they're dead, and by sending a radius messages. And if they respond, then they are marked not dead again.
Be careful with this parameter. if you play with these numbers, you may end up in totally destroying your radius hierarchy.
Yeah.
If the timeout is too low and you check the status, it may be that you have made all of your radius servers, higher level servers, a lot dead. So this means that you cannot send requests to upper hierarchy because it's marked dead for your radius server. So be careful with this parameter. Also, if you overcome with the size of the window, that might be too slow for the clients. So client is waiting, let's say, 30 seconds. And it has to get the answer in 30 seconds. If you have timeout somewhere that is larger than that, or too small, it might end up with the client saying, okay, I'm not getting the answer. I will repeat the question. What you get is a tidal wave of requests. The other side is too slow in answering, and this side is too fast in sending another request, re-authenticate. So don't play with these numbers if you are not sure what you are doing. That's the message.
Yeah.
It looks like I can adjust whatever I want. No, you have to adjust according to your network capabilities. If the network is slow, then don't make, short, too small time windows. If it is fast, don't make it too long. So be careful.
In general, you should not play with the parameters.
If you don't know what you are doing.
Yeah. That's the FreeRADIUS.
And consult the network engineers to know about the characteristics of the network.
And these numbers are default ones.
You should also take care about is that you shouldn't accept all radius attributes. They need to be filtered. Why? Because IDP, as we mentioned already, can send VLAN assignments. And what can happen? So for example, one of your users is roaming somewhere, and you send those attributes. And then if, for example, such a VLAN exists, your user can gain, so to say, even though he's authenticated, unauthorized access to that VLAN remotely, or to that remote VLAN, which is not good. So you should keep the assignment, and if you keep assignment unchanged, then the remote IDP decides in which VLAN your users end up. And one thing that can help with filtering the attributes is already defined in FreeRADIUS, and that's attribute filter module. And basically, there's one filtering rule for every phase of authentication. So pre-proxy, post-proxy, authentication reject, and so on. You can see that inside the most available directory. So there's the core part, of course, of FreeRADIUS configuration. The radiusd.conf is the one that's responsible for the behaving of radiusd daemon. How? Well, you can change a lot of things inside radiusd.conf. For example, where your log files will be stored. Then will you run the daemon as a privileged or non-privileged user? Then you can reference different modules by including the directory where the modules are stored. You can also specify virtual servers and include them. Radiusd.conf also includes clients.conf and proxy.conf files, and you also define there whether or not you should proxy the requests. My advice is not to change everything if you're not 100% completely sure what you're doing, because as Mira already mentioned, when you change something, you don't know, you can basically create a domino effect where you will affect the users in some way that you did not predict. So be very, very careful. One thing that probably is maybe intimidating when talking about FreeRADIUS is that it's a lot verbose. So when you open a configuration file, there is a lot of text. But if you take your time and read it, I guarantee that you will understand better, that you will know what to change and what not to change, and you will find a way to better interact with Radius Daemon and FreeRADIUS itself. And virtual servers are the ones that define which FreeRADIUS modules are to be executed for a given request. And in this first part of the training for SP, we will define just one virtual server named eduroam. When talking about FreeRADIUS modules, I would like you to now go to the, or you're already there, and if you list the directory, the radiusd directory, you can see the structure it has. It's similar to, I think, Apache configuration directory on Debian and Ubuntu. So all the available modules that can be used are listed in mods available directory. And you can find there some of the modules that we've mentioned and the ones that we will see soon. So attribute filter module, heap module, LDAP module, line log module, NTLM, auth module, SQL, and so on. So if you'd like to see what the FreeRADIUS server already has in mods available directory, please go there and you'll see a lot of other modules which can be maybe interesting for you. If you want to test something, you can do it. There are, I think, some other interesting modules which you can take a look at. In order to be able to use any of the FreeRADIUS modules, they have to be linked. That's why I said that it resembles the Apache service on Ubuntu and Debian. So besides having mods available directory, where you actually just see the modules that are available, you have to link them or to include them in mods enabled directory. The linking is same for any Linux distribution, so that shouldn't be a problem if you have another preference for an Linux OS. And besides that, you can link it, but the most important part is to configure it properly. So without the proper configuration, you can do proxy.conf, you can configure proxy.conf, clients.conf, but if you want to use, for example, heap module, if you don't configure it correctly, the server just won't start and probably won't work at all. So here's the example of FreeRADIUS virtual server eduroam for SPs. Basically, what we can use here are the authorized pre-proxy, post-proxy, and post-auth sections. Why? Because we want to check if user is authorized, and that's why we're using auth.log to see the underlying radius request. We use suffix model because based on the suffix, as we mentioned, that request will be proxied where it should be proxied. In this case, that's federation level radius, which will then in turn proxy that request to the IDP of the user. Pre-proxy is important because it logs what is being sent before that request is proxied upstream to the federation level radius. You should also, for example, if a counting request is the radius packet, you should filter those attributes. Then we have post-proxy. When thinking about this kind of can confuse you because it's not post-proxy. I myself was imagining post-proxy is happening here, but it's not. The post-proxy section is used after the request is, after the reply is sent all the way back. So that's actually the post-proxy section. That's actually the point in time when post-proxy section is used. Once again, we're filtering the attributes that are not needed, and we'll also using the post-proxy log module, which writes down all the radius messages, and in case of, for example, heap, other heap messages. And then again, never mind if user is authenticated properly or not. The request goes to the post-auth section, which also logs the reply, whether or not it's accepted or rejected. And this line is used when authentication request is accepted, and also we need to do this even if the request is part rejected. of the .1x, so to say, elements. One of the elements is, of course, the supplicant. And I would like to, I don't know, we maybe have time just until lunch to finish with eduroam cat. I would like to demonstrate how to set up one IDP. So the reference setup of this VM that we are using is based on using ipttls. And that's probably the easiest way to implement eduroam in large community. I personally don't have anything against pip mschap, but it can only use NT-hash or plain text passwords, while TTLS can use almost all known hashes.
Okay, maybe now it's time for the security consideration. So
yeah.
There are two philosophies. One is keep the password in the plain text in your Active Directory and cache it, secure it during the transfer, encrypt it during the transfer. That's the Microsoft vision. There is the other way of keeping the hash password in your directory, in the identity management system. So nobody knows the password. You can't read it. And then you send it over the network. There is no need to encrypt it because it's already encrypted. But these two mechanisms are not compliant. Either password is encrypted in the directory, LDAP, or it is not, Active Directory. So for the Active Directory, you use pip mschap for that. For the other, you use EFTLS, TTLS, EFTTLS, or something else. So make a decision. A good one would be that you encrypt the password in the directory. Why? You can then download the content of the directory, back it up, and all the time nobody knows the password because what you are handling with data you are using is encrypted password. Who's going to decrypt that? I mean, if you SHA-1 or SHA-256, then, you know.
Like in shadow file.
Yes. So encrypted. That would be my advice. But if you are into Microsoft world, then you have to follow their advices. It's just a matter of decision. But be advised that you can't mix it up. If you are with the Active Directory, then the pip is your way. You have to encrypt the password when you send it over the net. But here, in this solution, what will happen is that your module from the radius will send, will never know the password. It will just send to the LDAP backend, is this okay or not? But, I mean, it's important what is, the whole matter is the channel encrypted and password is going clear, or is the password encrypted and the channel is who cares? That's the whole matter. So these are two philosophies here, and I just wanted to let you know that Marco is saying if you are going the mschap way, pip mschap way, then this is deliberate decision. It will still work. Who cares?
Yeah.
But you have to know for the other systems. So
anyway,
if you go Microsoft for the whole. Forget about the FreeRADIUS. Use they have, I don't know how this is called, EAS these days. They change the names. Internet Access and something like that. Go use that. There is negotiation process on the radius servers in between. These guys speak chat. Okay, I'm going to use it.
but anyway, if the password is hashed in the directory, it will work with CAP or mschap.
Yes, it will. But the mechanism is the mechanism is different because radius will ask the backend I have something, but I don't know if it is okay or not. It depends on the module. Radius has modules for communicating with the backend. It may be LDAP, it may be DB, let's say MySQL DB, it may be text file. So different modules, different plugins is the right word, different plugins for different, but that is the next presentation.
Practically DB drivers, so to say, yeah. So good thing about ePTLS is now that all major OSs have built-in support, even now Windows. That's what Miro mentioned yesterday. And in my opinion, after 5 years working with eduroam and with a lot of angry users, this is eduroam cat is the best, safest, and the easiest way to avoid headache with users, because it enables really in no time configuring the profiles for most of the major OSs, including Linux, Windows, and so on. So I'll try now to show you. So basically the URL in general is cat.eduroam.org, but I'm using the test instance in order to show you, because I don't want to create problems in my environment. So this is the interface that we start with. So on it's really easy. I mean, for users, you just click here, and on the right-hand side, you'll be shown the available or nearest IDPs. And I don't know why here is France, but never mind, it should work. And then the user usually just clicks on his home institution. I'll try to find something.
If you put down the Armenia or try to do the, you'll find Armenian ones.
Oh, this is test instance.
The test instance, then it's. Yes.
So for example, this is my home institution, which is currently linked in the test instance. I click there, and there's the automatic, the cat automatically recognizes which operating system is in use. So what happens? The user only needs to download this, enter his username and password, and be careful to repeat to them as much as it's necessary to always enter the username with the realm. Because if they don't, it will work locally, but the point of eduroam is roaming, so when they roam, it won't work. They just won't have the service. So always remind them to use realm in their username. So when this is installed, you just enter your username and password, and everything that's needed to enable the secure communication between the user device and the access point is configured. So there is the root server certificate, or actually root certificate, which is used for signing the server certificate, which basically enables that secure communication. So this is just the user interface. If you think that cat missed the platform you are using, you can click here, all platforms, and now you can see how many different operating systems are supported. So almost all except Windows XP, although we see from time to time on the mailing lists requests for cat installers for Windows XP. Then you can see all the operating systems from Apple family, Linux installers, Chrome OS, Android, and so on. One thing I do have to mention here is that this is the test instance, so you don't see the installers for Android 7 and 8, which Mira showed yesterday, that they already exist. So don't worry. So this is just the user interface. One thing I would like to recommend to Armenian National Research and Education Network is to maybe apply and translate the user interface to Armenian, because here you can see how many different languages we have, and you just, I don't know, do they send to CatDevel list request to translate to Armenian?
Can be cat minus users. Can be cat dual, but I don't know, maybe Armenian, is Armenian available now? You didn't do.
No, we didn't work on
not, it's maybe 2 pages of text, not more. So
Yeah,
but
plus
it would be quite useful because then
Yes,
it will be also your letters. So for the people who don't know English, how to read and write, it would be much easier and more user friendly. So I advise him that. Stefan is normally very fast when the new language is in, so he'll send you exact how to
yeah, there's the
instructions on how to do that. That is being done by some of the translation services.
Transifex.
Yeah.
It's called Transifex, yeah.
I noted on the list there was recent some translations.
Yeah.
In a few days.
Dutch one, I think.
Yeah.
The new Dutch one. So yeah, just do it. And whoever does it, it's okay. I mean, you can find a professor of Armenian language to do it. I mean, professional. Be done. You just make sure it's really not a big work.
So this is the user interface. Now I'm going to try and show you how to configure an IDP. So on the left-hand side here, you can see the eduroam admin manager IDP text. If you click there, you then need to click login, and you will be redirected to the monitor.eduroam.org page, where you choose how will you log in to your profile. As I think is still not in production, I will try to find it. So this, of course, doesn't have to go this way. You can also use social login like Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. I don't know what else is there. Hopefully I didn't miss. Now this is the consent model. I want to bother with this. This is going to be interesting when you do you have a federation in production in Edugain? Identity federation.
Yes.
Oh, great. Then you're used to this. So here is my profile page, and as a federation administrator, I already been invited and assigned some privileges, and this is probably interesting for Arthur, but I think you already seen this. Yeah. So I'm not going to bother with this information here and down there. We are going to create a new institution, so like this, and then register new institution. We'll leave it in Serbian Federation. Do you have maybe an email here?
What?
Do you have a mail client here, or?
You want this to be invite me?
Maybe, yeah.
Oh, right, Arthur.
Yeah, but you'll have to paste the invitation link here then. Can you log in here, or?
I log in here now with my profile also, but
Never mind. If yeah.
so Arthur add
Okay, but I want to show it here. So can you log in here with that mail, or do you have a Gmail maybe account so you can log in here to send it there? let's try it like this.
Sure. No, let's start and come from this side. Maybe it's in spam. It's very strict. Yes.
So now here you can see the interface when you first log in, when you click on the invitation email. So there are general institution properties. So country Serbia, and institution name is default on default or other languages is test ASNet. And now you should probably configure the general information. It's usually very good for user to see the logo of his institution. If he cannot find it on the list, it's easier for him to see his institutions and terms of use. So, for example, do you have any pictures here?
You can click from the website. ASNet, for example. ASNet.conf. I think it should be that should be.
So you add a logo, and usually you can add another institution name. Here is where the Armenian language would probably help for other people, but let's say English. Okay. And another thing that helps users find their home institution and download the installers is to define the location. You can use addresses, but you can also use the locate me function. So here you can see that it's now Yerevan, Armenia,
Exactly.
with the correct latitude and longitude. Then here you can see additional media properties, additional SSIDs, hotspot.point2. We said that we're not going to talk about that too much. Hotspot.point2. Whether or not you're supporting.
Anybody knows what the hotspot new standard that is pushed by the Wi-Fi Broadband Alliance, and the standard actually is aiming to, as the final end, it's aiming to eliminate the SSID. Each consortium, each roaming consortium will actually has its own ID. And eduroam already has one. So your client would actually send an authentication request out, and when it tries to associate, it will be, in the air there are this and this roaming consortium, which one is yours? So SSID will go away and it will look more like wired connection. But stay tuned for that. They had the hotspot standard, some version which actually didn't work in the situation in which there are more than one roaming consortium, so it didn't work. And now they are upgrading it. So stay tuned for that. But it is nowadays you could use it only locally.
So basically, you probably won't need any additional SSIDs. Hotspot 2.0, forget about it for now. You should state if you support the wired IEEE.1x standard, and remove or bootstrap of onboarding SSIDs. If you have a captive portal, then you may want to disable that SSID after the bootstrap process, but we are not big fans of.
When can be needed the additional SSID?
When there are two
when
SPs.
When you have a policy that is something like that, and also have a look. In some cases, in some old emails you will find it as the problem of Trafalgar Square. That is the large square in London. Yeah? A lot of institutions around, and everybody has to have their own wireless. It has to be eduroam, it has to be mine. You know what a stubborn boss is, yeah? And it has to be mine. So my wireless is interfering with your wireless. So you are authenticating to my Wi-Fi, and suddenly you move laptop 5 centimeters and you are authenticated to your Wi-Fi. And it cannot work. So you have to have distinguished distinguished SSIDs, so you know to which, that's for the users actually, otherwise they can't work. Okay, the clever solution would be to switch off one, or put the access points in a way so they cover the space correctly, not overlap. But okay, people are stubborn sometimes, and this is for it.
Yeah.
This is for the situation when you have too many wireless networks, okay? You won't run into that situation so far. When you run, just have a thought about it. In some cases, when people were clever, the schools and faculties just switch off their wireless because the city's wireless was covering the whole city and the whole building. So you switch off what is unnecessary, but sometimes people are peculiar, so that's the reason.
So this part is very important. You, as an IDP, you should define help desk details for all users, because in case you don't, either you will get as an federation administrator all the email, or someone else will get all the email. For example, it's not unusual to get an email from an unsatisfied user on the CAT users list because they don't know whom to talk to. So you should probably add, for example, if you have support email, terms of use should be also uploaded. Phone support, web support, let's say we use just email. I'm going to create a bogus email. And now we get to the EAP details for all users. So this profile is valid for all the users of one institution, but you can define sub-profiles. If you don't define sub-profiles, then these EAP details will apply for all users. When is it, for example, useful to have multiple profiles? If you, for example, want to divide the teaching staff from the students. So if you use one radio server for teaching staff and the other for students, you can use different EAP profiles. So what do you need? You need CA certificate file. It might sound maybe complicated or not so clear, but this CA certificate file should be your root CA certificate file. If you have self-signed certificate, then you should also use the root. I will use the Terena DigiCert Assured Root ID CA certificate, and you should definitely put in the name of the authentication server or the common name from the server certificate. So I will put, for example, let's do this or something like and that's basically all you need for a profile to be configured. You have a root CA file, you have the common name of authentication server, and that's all the user needs to be safe when connecting to eduroam. Of course, you now have to configure the supported deep types, but this is the thing that affects them the most. So you can also add some profile descriptions. This is not necessary, and you should probably add a profile display name in order to be displayed as the name of your institution and not as, for example, 0, as has happened a couple of times in AMRES. And you should also say if your production is, if your profile is production ready. So if you're just in the testing phase, you can leave it as is, but you have to enable it later for users to be able to use this profile to be visible on the get start page. And you should also define the realm. And then you also have a part where you define whether or not you support anonymous outer identity. You can enable it, but you don't have to. Also, if you don't want your users to go directly to cat-eduroam.org, you can define installer download location. So you can create your profile here, download all the installers, and put them on your web pages, and then you should say to your users, okay, all the available installers are available at the official web pages of Asnet or any other IDP. We're not going to use that now. And now we come to the part where you select the supported EAP types. Here is the list of currently supported EAP types, and we will choose EAP TTLS, for example. And you can also add more than one supported EAP type, but the one that is listed higher. For example, if I do this, now PIP MSCHAP will have an advantage over TTLS PUP, but we want to use TTLS PUP, so we'll just leave it like here. And now,
what is the reason of not adding all in proper order?
well, I'm not sure. There's no reason for that, but you sure?
If I'm not sure what clients could use, maybe to add everything, but in proper order. What I think that TTLS should be first, but maybe
you can't use at the same time TTLS PUB and TTLS MSCHAP.
Yes.
You can't use it at the same time.
But this depends on the user's device.
No.
Not only on the user's device.
It depends on the IDP. IDP cannot support both at the same time. Okay, it can, but that's quite a work for you.
Yeah.
Normally, as an IDP, you select one EAP type and you support that normally.
There is something I don't understand.
Have a look. IDP is the site that does the authentication. And the service provider side side is willing to accept everything. But it might be the same radius server which is doing IDP and SP.
But this is the part that will be installed as a supplicant into the
Yeah.
device.
Yes.
And it doesn't depend on the type of the device.
No, because
Every operating system.
Some operating systems do not support MSCHAP, TTLS MSCHAP. Some did, some do not.
That is why I say, so if you don't include several, your supplicant would not work in some operating system.
that's right.
That is why I say that why not to include
But you
as
cannot.
much as possible to support as much as possible operating system in proper order. If you want to define the first what you would like to be used first, I understand that. But if we will need others, so some operating system may not function with your supplicant.
It's not supplicant, it's configuration, okay? And it's adjusted to each and every operating system. So when you finish this, you will get that famous table I was showing yesterday. And that table lists all of the operating system. But for some of the operating system, we don't support all of the EF types. So that's the table, operating system EF types. Yeah, here the EF types, here the operating system. And in some situations it doesn't work. It just doesn't, just plainly not working. It's not supported by the machine.
Yeah? Okay.
And not just that, you'd have to have another type of authentication configured on your radius server, which is a lot of work. So we
always think about the IDP side and SP side. This
Yeah.
is IDP side configuration.
So when you choose the supported EAP types for this profile, you're again offered to define a support email, terms of use, and everything. But if you want the same configuration items to apply as before, before we started to configure the profile, you can leave it as before. Here again, you can see the CA certificate file and name of the authentication server, but we have configured that already, so we don't need to configure that. Here we again can see the hotspot.2.0, additional SSIDs, removing of some SSIDs, and so on. You basically need just to configure the EAP types, the anonymity support, the realm, and whether or not the profile is production ready. And when you're finished, you just go to save data. This is just a warning that we didn't set a default language. So that doesn't mean that the profile won't work. It just will display the name differently. So this is also a good check to see what have you configured. So realm is configured, anonymous identity support is on. So you support you support usernames with anonymous at asnet.am. One profile name, it's production ready, no redirection. Supported EAP type is ppmchap v2 and TTLS PAP.
What means redirection? Redirection of?
I think redirect users to the home page.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
To,
If you're not willing to use eduroam cat default page, you just redirect them to the, and that's it. And now you have fully configured IDP profile for your institution with root certificate, with realm, with everything, with common name of the server, which is everything you need to configure. You can run some additional tests. Here you can see the option check realm reachability. But yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, this is expected. Yeah. This is expected because I created a test realm.
Without the real IDP on the other side.
Yeah.
This actually is, you can do live logging tests, so you can do the test. You can see if somebody with this setup will be able to log in really. So as the IDP admin, you can immediately test if the profile works.
Yeah, but
if this one says it works, you can come later on and see if it is still working. You can come after a year and see if it is still working. So if you change something in your setup of IDP, you can go there and see, it works or it is not working. I have to do something around. So it's a good tool. It actually is a bit of diagnostics in there and testing.
and basically here, if you would get Nepter records, you would see them also. So here you can see that your realm is currently static with no DNS errors encountered. Yeah. And one thing I do have to mention is, if for some reason you do not upload the root certificate, this will be displayed differently. And if you enter your root certificate, it will have the blue R around it.
In some cases, there are intermediate certificates. And then people upload the whole
Chain. Yeah.
chain. So you will see here the whole chain, or intermediate.
Yeah.
Or you would see an error if something is in the certificate is not.
Yeah, so the intermediate certificate would have I instead of R. But the only thing actually you need is the root certificate. And
It
now,
actually allows you to, if you have the root in there, you can review. You can have another new one certificate for that, but the root would be enough to verify
Yeah.
things. Okay.
So
when the server certificate expires, you renew the certificate, but no changes here, no changes for the users. That's good.
yeah, practically it's transparent to the end user. The server certificate has changed, but the root certificate hasn't, and everything will still work without any issues.
So did I understood correctly that here there is no problem to use self-signed certificate?
No problem.
And because I did that way, and if we will define the root certificate for ASNet, for example, this could be used for IDPs.
Yeah.
And
You would have to sign the server certificates of those IDPs, and then they would just have to enter your root certificate in
Yes.
eduroam cat.
But you know why? Again, I was telling you, the idea of using self-signed certification or using the smaller community for signed certificate is actually that you are in lesser security danger than if you use something big. Because if something big, let's say TCS, wants to change the root, then all of your users suddenly have to reinstall eduroam. It's a big work to be done. And with a private certificate, with a, so to say, self-signed certificate, you are still secure because you handle the root, the private key, you keep it safe, and that's it. And this is only for radius traffic, so no user sees, no browser sees unsigned certificates.
But from your practice, what types of certificates do you use? Private?
I use Terina certificates, TCS. So we had a bit of trouble, what Miro said, when Terina changed the root
From
certification.
commodity,
Yeah.
And they will have again in some years when they move from
Yeah.
TCS to somewhere else. So it's sometimes dangerous, and you are there are some guys from UK that would very powerfully, very strange, very strong fight for the self-signed certificates, for the unqualified certificates with this argument. I control this, and that's good for me because I can then ensure it lasts forever, until we find a better solution. And they have 1,000 of users, so if you have a university, 20,000 students, and you say, hey guys, tomorrow you have to change everything, and by the way, tomorrow is the exam day, you can expect a riot. So that's a good practice.
Yeah, looking, just a second, I'll be finished in a minute. And when looking now at the slider here you can see on some pictures that the profile is verified here, for example, which means that those installers are signed and recognized by operating systems. That's what Miro also said yesterday. So it should cause no false positives. And looking from that angle also, the users are safe and don't have to think about whether or not they're using the proper eduroam profile. And now, just to demonstrate, we've configured profile for ASNet.am, and we've checked the box that it's production ready. So now, when I click eduroam user, it shows the best guess as first, and it's this profile that we have just configured. Now the user only has to download it, enter its username and password, and it's safe. So I would strongly recommend to start using this when you have more IDPs, because the overhead of mails and calls to your help desk will probably take a lot of your time, and you'll have to find a way to solve it. And I think this is by far the best tool to do it. We've configured SP and all the parts of the supplicant. We can go to IDP. And what is needed for one institution to become an IDP, that's an own realm, which is in this example, or on the VM, is sci.am. I didn't, once again, know how many people will be and from which institution, so I didn't add more realms. But you can, of course, change that to test with your own test users. We need a TLS server certificate. We need a user database or a user directory, and a few configuration changes in the server, which can be for someone easy and for someone will probably be a bit harder. But don't worry, everything is written down in the workbook. And creating an IDP actually represents creating an authentication server, which is the last part of the .1x picture that we show. So we've configured the service provider. And now, when becoming an IDP, that Radius server becomes an authentication server. We've seen that we need a .1x enabled network devices or a switch or a wireless access point, and we have a supplicant that we've configured through eduroam cat. So what needs to be changed? There are at least 3 changes that you need to create. So the first one is to add a realm that corresponds to your home institution. Then we have to add the ability to handle IP communication in the virtual server eduroam, which we created. And for inner part of authentication, where the credentials are exchanged, we need a new virtual server, which is called eduroam inner. I'd like to tell you to take a look at Open LDAP Administrator's Guide, which is currently, I think, at version 2.4. It is very detailed, and I think that you can find a lot more than just from these slides and my talk, and it will certainly help you to comprehend everything that's needed to be done. And you can also try and use a different design of your Open LDAP. I've created here an Open LDAP with 2 branches and so on, memory database, but you can change all that and try to play. I don't know, it's a matter of preference, you know. Each and every backend for Open LDAP has its advantages and disadvantages, so it's basically a design goal. So what's more important for you? Also, one of the things that I would like to mention is that most of the NRENs that use Open LDAP have defined their own schemas. Open LDAP is based on using schemas, which are then referenced in /debugging.conf, which is the main configuration file. And I for sure know that Carnet has one switch, also Amnes has one, but you have to take care. Why? Because when creating a schema, most of the user-defined schemas are based on the other well-known schemas. And if you define your, I'm talking from experience because we did that and had to change that afterwards, we created our schema as structural. But OpenLDAP allows only one structural schema. So that's, I think, in a torque person or something like that, you'll have to check it. And if you want to use in a torque person and your own schema, which is structural, you cannot do both. You can only use one. So that's also one design goal that has to be considered before deploying Open LDAP. But if you create your schema as auxiliary schema, then you can use any other structural schema and take along your own auxiliary schema. Regarding your own schema, that is not a requirement, but can make your life easier. Why? Because when connecting to edugain, you can use your Open LDAP, which already has some user attributes, which can be easily mapped into what a web service is expecting to see. So, for example, I don't know, UID, common name, display name, and so on. If you use LDAP, you'll already ahead than when using some other backend. So my recommendation would be to use Open LDAP as much as you can, because it will help you in the future also. Now we'll go to IP module. IP module was previously, in previous versions actually of FreeRADIUS, referenced as IP.conf, which has now changed and it has been moved to mods available. I'm telling this if someone already used to configure FreeRADIUS server prior to versions 3.0, for example, 15. And this module defines which IP methods are allowed. For example, you can define IP TTLS, PIP, MSCHAP, IP TLS, and so on. And when using FreeRADIUS, one of nice features is that when you're installing it from the source, when the installation finishes, when you actually type make install, a bootstrap script is run, and a new certificate is created based on the configuration files that already exist in certs directory inside RadiDB. If you want to play around with it, you can, because you define there, for example, everything you would actually define for a certificate to be created. So here's how IP module looks like. So I've tried to explain how it works. So first of all, at the beginning of the IP module file, there's a default IP type defined. In the default configuration, it's MD5, so that should be changed to TTLS. Then there's the TLS config, TLS common section. This section is pretty important. Why? Because here you define everything related to your server certificate. So you define the CA or the root CA certificate, you define the server certificate, and this is a mistake, that this should say server.key, and the key, private key file for this server certificate. You should take care, especially with the private key file, and the rest here with the default installation should be left untouched. So be careful. And then scrolling through the IP module, I cut off some parts of configuration because they are not that important. You see the TTLS section, which then references the TLS common section previously defined, which means that TTLS will use the server certificate and the server key file when establishing an IP TTLS session. And one thing that has to be changed, this is actually the default part, but this part should be changed. So you need to specify the virtual server for inner authentication. I put here the eduroam inner tunnel virtual server, which will be configured, which can be configured according to the exercise book. But first, please take your time to configure IP module. Yeah, all the server certificates and the server key files are already present. They are self-signed. So if you, for example, are using some commercial root certificate authority, you would have to change that to another certificate that you were issued by that certification authority. One thing I failed to mention is that private key password should be protected, but this is the default value, so you shouldn't use whatever as a private key password. So now the last mile in configuring the IDP is to add your own realm, which we already done, if I'm not mistaken, in proxy.conf. Then you should add the virtual server eduroam inner tunnel. Has anyone done that already, or no? So you should do that. So just copy the inner tunnel default virtual server that already exists in sites available into eduroam inner tunnel. Make the changes as per the document or the workbook, and then you can modify the example user in the user's file just for testing purposes. For example, in SP, you don't have to authenticate the users. You just need to have a virtual server, for example, name it eduroam, that will be able to proxy the requests or to do what's supposed to do. Then you, as an IDP, have to authenticate the user. In order to authenticate the user, you have to have defined IP type or IP module, which contains the server certificate. And in order for those credentials to be protected from this point to this point, a tunnel is created, which is called, which is actually the virtual server eduroam inner tunnel, in which and only inside it credentials can be seen. So it's they are actually encrypted.
TLS.
Yeah. TLS encrypted.
So if I don't have yet configured,
Yeah.
and I use only files as a
But if you use only pub, that's bad.
Yeah,
that's not eduroam. But it actually also not one.x. That's not
yeah.
eduroam.
It works, but it's not eduroam.
Yes, but that's plain pub.
Yeah.
That's plain text. And,
so if I don't have this, I don't have certificates generated, no inner channels exist. It's go plain text.
Yeah.
It's going plain text.
Absolutely
this is
visible.
not eduroam.
Yeah.
We are not teaching you radius. We are teaching you the eduroam style.
So this is the key component.
EAP is important component. Remember the picture. It's radius plus EAP. 1.x means that the radius transport is enabled with EAP.
And using EAP is closely connected to enabling the inner tunnel as a separate configuration.
Yes.
Exactly. Basically, it enables end-to-end encryption between user's device. I didn't draw this correctly, but between end user's device and his IDP. So that means that no one in the middle can read the username and the password. It will be just visible for IDP. And PKI is a whole other story. It would take, I don't know, at least one more day just to talk about PKI and everything that underlines it. So. So is it okay?
Yeah.
You understand? Yeah. Okay. And yeah, regarding the other, I just saw the screen from our colleague. Regarding the other stuff in LDAP module, don't again, once again, and I'm going to repeat it. Do not change anything that you don't know what's going to do, because you can create much more problems than by leaving it as it is. And that's one of the starting points. If you want to complain to Alan de Kock, the first thing is it works out of the box. Don't change anything if you don't know what you're doing. So you're safe. a pretty unpleasant guy by looking at his emails, and when people cry for help, he says, just read it. That's his way of helping. So. So I think I've put in the part with starting the radius server. So there are two ways you can start radius server. You can start it in debug mode, adding the radiusd, typing radiusd and adding a minus capital X, which enables you to see which modules have been loaded if everything has been configured. If it hasn't, it usually displays the line and the configuration item where the mistake was made. So it's good for debugging purposes, because then you can see if the configuration has been created properly. It also can be used in other cases when debugging other cases, but what's bad with using debug mode is that passwords are visible. So be careful when using it. Nobody likes for someone else to know his password, but sometimes it's necessary. So I especially encourage you to use radiusd-x every time you change something, because if you don't change, you will, if you don't restart it in debug mode, you'll think, it's working, it's great, but until you restart the server, you won't know. And the first time the server restarts, I don't know for what reason, maybe there's power outage and it goes up, and then reads the configuration, and if it's something wrong, it won't actually go up, and you'll probably find yourself debugging what went wrong when I configured everything correctly. So it's better to have a couple of minutes of outage right after you change something than to wait days or weeks or months, and then you forget what you did, and then you have to go through configuration and it's never good to have the users dialing and complaining that something isn't working. So yeah, this bold part is especially important. So when we're testing, we do not need to verify the service certificate, but you should always, always, always encourage your users to use the certificate. You can use that. The way you can practically force them into is by using eduroam cat, because they then do not have to search for the root certificate, install it, and everything. The average user just doesn't want to do that. He wants a service that's working right now. And cat helps with that greatly. So you can actually make your users connect to eduroam safer by using the eduroam cat, which has already pre-installed root certificate, and you don't have to worry about that anymore. So because I'm in a kind of rush, I'm going to go to the final part of this presentation. For everyone that's still here with us, I'm sorry if I haven't been so interesting, but I'm trying. So I'm trying to talk also about some practical stuff that happened to us in order for you to know what can you come across. And I think that's important. So yeah, well, we already talked about log files, and they're practically used to track malicious users and can be used to debug possible problems. That's not anything unusual when working with Linux and any other service. If something is not working, you have to check the log files. That's somehow expected. What is the aim? Well, the aim is to provide evidence to government agencies including offenders, realm, and login time. We already talked about the username. Why not? Because it can be forged. It can be I don't know, guessed. Someone can guess your username, unfortunately. I think that also, at least in AMRES, it happens not a lot, but one of the first rules which shouldn't, one of the first things that shouldn't be done is to share your credentials with someone, and people tend to do that. So that's also one thing you have to take care about, because you're not responsible for an irresponsible user. You cannot think about everything he's going to do. If he's not keeping his account safe, why should you care? And also the outer identity, as we already mentioned, you can enter anything. You can enter your real identity, but you can also use your anonymous identity. When tracing the user's realm, you should keep HTTP or ARP sniffing logs, radius authorization logs, and the server that you're using should be, or let me rephrase that, must be configured to talk to an NTP server, or has to be synchronized. If you don't have one in ASNet, you can use any of the higher hierarchy level NTP servers like Stratum, I don't know, 0 or something. But you can also use some servers that are already in sync with those at higher level. For example, I think there's one in Aconet also. I think we're using that one.
We have the two of them here.
Great. So what are the steps when identifying the user? So first, identify the IP address of the malicious user. How do you do that? Well, by keeping the HCP logs. Then in the HCP logs, you find the IP address and the corresponding MAC address that this IP address was assigned to, or you can use ARP sniffing logs. Then you find the authentication section in authentication logs, which are created automatically when running Radius in normal mode, not in debug mode. In debug mode, you will see the result of authentication, but it won't be written into the log file. So in order to see the log file, to see the authentication results in the log file, you have to run it in normal mode. And then after finding the session, you can easily find the realm and the timestamp from the authentication log. If, for example, a foreign user like myself comes to ASNet and creates some kind of security incident, it doesn't have to be, I don't know, something big. For example, spam messages, copyright infringement, or torrenting also fall into category of security incidents. Then you have to inform eduroam operations team, which can link the realm of the malicious user to the home federation. Then in the next step, the home federation will contact the user's home institution or identity provider, and then the identity provider can find the username of the infringing user and cross-reference the timestamp from the service provider's logs with its own logs, which is why it's important to have an NTP synchronized server, so you are sure that that's the same user. If they are not in sync, I don't know, if it's, I don't know, 1 or 2 hours out of sync, then you can say, well, I don't know, I don't have in my logs a user with that username, so I can help you. So when taking a closer look at logging requirements, what is needed is network addressing, authentication logs, a reliable time source, and a technical contact. Technical contact is very, very important in this aspect.
Sorry, Martin, could you go back 2 slides?
2 slides? Okay.
No, one also.
One more, this way or?
No. be able to log it to somewhere outside the device or syslog or
Well,
somewhere?
I'll try to explain how we do it. So, for example, we have a wireless controller which has an external DHCP server. After authentication, the wireless controller knows to send the DHCP lease request to that DHCP server, which then responds. And on that DHCP server, you can find everything you need. So the IP address and the MAC address of the infringer or user.
Whatever you do, you have to keep the logs. I mean,
Yeah.
it's for you. So DHCP logs are essential. Without them, you actually don't know which client has been assigned which address.
Yeah, but I have to mention, so in Radius, client IP address isn't the address of the Radius client. It's referencing the client as a user device. There's another Radius attribute called NAS IP address, which references actually the NAS or the Radius client from which the request came. So be careful. NAS IP address is for Radius clients. Client IP address is for user devices. It took me a while to figure that out, so that's why I'm sharing it with you.
And if you use NAT,
Yeah.
it's also important to keep the NAT logs. Because with the NAT logs, you combine the NAT and DHCP, and only with that you know which is the exact client.
Yeah, but
be advised, MAC address is not something that would uniquely identify the users. Windows 10, go anonymous, it will change the MAC address occasionally, it will obfuscate it, it will anonymize it, so MAC address is not something you can really rely on.
And the same is in Linux.
Yeah, so the MAC address is good, but then you need all of the logs to depict the right device.
Okay.
And if you need really to block the user, then the best way of blocking is to introduce in your network chargeable user identity. I was talking yesterday about. So think about adding that. That's the additional practice in the policy. You will find it as a should, as a may. So it's not mandatory for the eduroam, but you can do it. This means that operator, the SP provider, gets appropriate hash from the identity provider. That hash is only for that pair. So for the other pair, the other hash is done. But this hash uniquely identifies the username. So if a user changes MAC address or the device, who cares? It is always the same CUI because this is generated by IDP. It has nothing to do with the other systems. In that respect, you can block that username with all the devices. But then you have to have this CUI. The name chargeable user identity comes from the old days in which this was used to charge the user money for using dial-up service, any other telco services. Because this is the good attribute. If actually accounting fails, this is the one that grasps the content. And we introduced it in the eduroam just for the security purposes. So you can use it also for following the traffic.
And I think in this version of FreeRADIUS, it's already present in the config. You just have to call the module, and it will generate it on the IDP side and also SP side. I think there's a possibility to send operator name attributes automatically.
But you can survive without it.
Yeah.
You can survive without it, but it's sometimes a bit hard.
Question. Well, what is your opinion? Which one is better, NAT or HTTP proxy?
It really depends on, okay, so as the eduroam people, we dislike any kind of web portals. So whenever you say HTTP proxy, I dislike it by definition. So NAT, yes, the NAT is the best. But on the other hand, from the modern purposes, IPv6 is the best option. So if you can go IPv6. The modern devices, everybody has the modern laptops. The modern devices, smartphones, they are IPv6 capable. So if your network is able, go IPv6 if you need it.
From your experience, doesn't end
In
users?
student dormitories, we don't use IPv6, okay?
Because I think that it could be implemented with certain users will start complaining about connectivity to some IPv6 sites or something else.
It might. Again, I mean, it's the matter of your decision. I don't know the
I
levels
won't
of your
experience
use.
because for servers deploying IPv6 it's okay, but for the clients, I think it should be.
Windows should do it properly. iOS should do it properly. Linux should do it properly.
No.
Yes, but content is not.
I think
Yes, but the content providers might not. Yes.
I talk about content. So if they could not open some website because it's not IPv6 enabled.
I agree.
There are some other things like IPv6. You remember multicast. Yeah? You know what happens to multicast. Nothing essential. It's a good idea still, but nobody really uses it. So we don't know. I'm just saying that if you feel like using IPv6, you may. All the components are IPv6 enabled, but yeah, users may run into a situation in which this is a bad idea. And if not my experience, we don't use IPv6.
We
in
also.
student dormitories we use NAT.
We
We
also.
have log processing tools, but in home, in student dormitories, we use NAT.
So we're forced to use those then.
Of course, but for users using IPv6, I think it is not
Again,
native yet.
you may go IPv6, no problems, perfect, good for you, but you know it's your decision, and it's actually your users, because again, 10 times more of the usage will be inside the country than outside. So when you start a real eduroam in the country, you know the most of the users of eduroam will be Armenians. So would they be happy with it? That's something I can't say.
As for Amrest, we still use IPv4, but we're close to completely losing all the publicly routable IP addresses. So I don't know, we're going to maybe go NAT or IPv6. I'm not sure. So yeah, that's what Miro was mentioning in the first session. You have to plan carefully. When talking about VLAN, it's not just access points. It's DHCP. Take care about your IP range. That has to be also carefully planned in order not to run into a situation where you cannot expand your IP range and you don't know what to do. So
Can Radius work with IPv6?
Yep.
But it will open to you network for IPv4.
you mean like some kind of tunneling IPv4 to 6 or
After
something?
verifying that you are you, we will get the VLAN for before.
We never tested it, never tried it actually.
Good idea.
Think about it.
We encourage you to try it and place reports to eduroam mailing list so everybody knows. If it can be done, I'm sure that a lot of people would adopt it. So, as already mentioned, besides MAC address, we need a precise time when the incident or DHCP lease was issued. MAC address of the user's device, as I mentioned, it's calling station ID. If you look at the logs, it's calling station ID, not NAS IP address. And calling station ID is the MAC address of the user's device. NAS IP address is something else. Client IP address is the IP address allocated to user's device, and NAS IP address is the IP address of Radius client. And identity providers must log all authentication attempts, recording the authentication result returned by the server or authentication database, and reason for denial or failure of the authentication. So,
what can be reason for denial?
well, no, we've mentioned that, I think. So, for example, you can get, I'm not sure whether that can be logged, but you can have denial of service when you authenticate okay, but the DHCP pool is exhausted, for example. Failure or denial could be, for example, you're authenticating at the wrong IDP. So you should know how that request got to your Radius server when it shouldn't have. And failure can be mostly for two reasons. One is a wrong username, and the second is wrong password, which is most common.
Can be advised when you use LDAP, it will never tell you what is wrong. It will just send out the authentication error.
Yeah.
You will get the same error code if the username is wrong and if the password is wrong.
Yeah. Bind failed.
So it's -10 or whatever error code,
Yeah.
but it will always be the same.
Can we create fake radius server?
No, if the user is using the, so let me
Yeah.
draw a picture.
That's a good question, yeah.
That's the man in the middle thing, and I can
Yeah.
draw a picture. So, somebody will have to work on that. So, green color. So you have a user, you have the access point, two antennas. So this is our network access server. And somewhere there you have the IDP. There might be some radius server here. So your user, your applicant, wants to associate with this, and there is the request sent here, and the request is going through the net towards the IDP, okay? Marco was explaining, at that moment, the TLS tunnel is open, and TLS tunnel goes up to here. To close the tunnel, this here, gives the certificate of the IDP. So to make sure that this guy, your device, is talking to the right IDP, it checks the certificate, this certificate, yeah, of that IDP. If a user says, no, I don't want to check the certificate, wrong on his side, then somebody else can step in and say, I am radius IDP for that domain. And then inside this, just close the tunnel because no certificate check is being done here. Okay? So this is then called man-in-the-middle attack. MTM, as they call it.
We on our wireless access point.
This is not to do with the access
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
This is with your device.
This is practically
And,
the.
to make sure this is good, use cat.
We do not control access point.
Who cares?
No, you
This
actually
doesn't
do, but
do
it's
with
on the
access
user side, or
I have it on my mobile phone, okay? So this guy, this thing is actually as big as this. This is just one device that can play, that can act like an access point plus some software. So you can put it in your pocket and sniff all around. And you grant the access to the network. Who cares? But you steal the identities. That's your job.
yeah, and that's one more reason why our colleagues from JISC or Janet, prefer to use self-signed certificates because they say that right now at this moment in time everybody can get a certificate from a public CA.
Yes. So to get rid of that one, use the cats.
Yeah.
As you know, catch the mouses. So this cat will kill these attackers.
Okay, and the last session you described about the client database. I don't know, defense our clients from this attack. Help us.
Sorry, can you?
Just use cat, nothing else. I mean, you can invent your own installer system, but just
Yeah.
make sure all of the users have properly configured devices. And this means
Not
every
manual.
supplicant.
No, you.
Yes.
Well, let me tell you, it was done manually before CAT was created. So.
You can do it manually, but manual thing is not good. So manual means you have to download certificate from somewhere and attach it to your configuration.
So basically, either you're going to do it for, I don't know, 100, 200 PCs, I don't know, phones or something, or you have to tell the user to do it. Users most certainly aren't going to do that. They're going to try to connect. If they succeed, they're going to say, why would I ever need a certificate when it works like this. Users never think about their safety. And for example, imagine that this user wants to use, I don't know, some credit card to pay something online.
In connection with this, how we can, I don't know, help users to understand that not the credit preferred method is that usually the card. Because
Just tell them, you go there, click there, and that's all.
Yeah, we understand. But that's always the matter of carrot, you know. You have big carrot, big fruit, and a big bag.
the manually connection.
No, just tell them, you know, to be secure and to access the eduroam easy, go to that website and click. So everybody will follow. Why not?
Or even,
You see how cat is easy.
Yeah.
You go eduroam.org, type select Armenia, there are your IDPs, you find your one, you click, and it goes down.
yeah, the earlier versions even didn't have the automatic, how to say it, they didn't recognize automatically the operating system. Now it's even that easier that you don't have to think, what operating system am I using?
If you're preparing your phone, it's automatically give you the appropriate.
Yeah.
If you're wireless,
Yes,
Yeah.
it will try to guess your operating system.
Of course, yeah.
It will normally do it properly.
I think that there are some restrictions. For example, in order to use it on iOS or macOS, I think you have to download it through Safari.
No, yeah. Okay. So on these devices, when you buy a smartphone, there is the browser that comes together with the device. This browser has the access to the local certificate storage. The other browsers don't. So if you use the other browser, not the original one, then it won't store the certificate, it won't work.
Yeah,
You
but
have problems. So this is one of the FAQs we have together with the card. Use the original browser supplied with the operating system for the Androids and iPhones.
yeah, but
And for the Android, you need to download it from Google Apps, Play Store.
yeah.
But it really works. I mean, there are in something like less 30 months, so something more than a year, we had over 4 million downloads from CAD. 4 million downloads. Imagine that you do it twice, that is probably 2 million users, or at least 2 million devices configured by a CAD. So just use it. And for the users, you say, no typing in, no thinking, just use it.
Just username at realm, password, and that's all.
The way
Nothing
you
else.
would kind of, for your mobile phone, this is the same way you would download a new game or anything else. It's as easy as that. Visit the website, click it, and enter your username and password. That's it, for the first time.
But yeah,
It's never better than that. And for the IDP admins, you tell them, if you want all of your users to have the good configuration, so nobody comes and, this is not working for me, define the profile on the card and just sit and let them know, here is the profile used. It's quite easy mechanism. There is something for everybody, carrots for everybody. And of course, that is a stick. If it fails, then it's your problem. devices then stay locked to that because this is easiest authentication. So you have to teach the users how to overcome that and connect to something else. It's not always a good idea to have
That's
a
good to know.
SSID.
That's
You could have a setup SSID and here is eduroam, but I can't use it. Okay, there is a setup SSID. I select as setup, and then I have the access only to get. Sounds good, but it brings some other problems.
yeah,
Like your setup SSID is the only SSID I can connect to because the machine remembers the preferences and users do not know how to overcome.
yeah, that's a
Operating system have a nasty habit to try to be more clever than a user. So the first SSID they will try to associate is the one commonly used, last used, or the one without no authentication. So the open one. So they would again and again associate with the SSID open. And this is
yeah,
that's a good idea because I won't have to
yeah, that's good to know. We wanted to implement something like that.
think about it. Yeah,
yeah.
it might bring some challenges.
Yeah, we wanted to avoid the users complaining about they cannot use it and to avoid the load where people try to authenticate with usernames without realms and so on. So we also need to see when at what point logs should be kept. That's after a packet is received from a client, before handing it off to a proxy, after getting the response from the proxy, and before sending a reply back to the client. I think I already mentioned that, but those modules already exist in FreeRADIUS. Some just need to be commented out. They are already present in corresponding sections, but others need to be manually put into the correct part of the virtual server configuration. So these are auth detail, pre-proxy detail, post-proxy detail, and reply detail. I'm not going to talk too much about what all of them can show, but please try it and you'll see what information can you get from them. So, well, basically now you should, I don't know, we didn't manage to test everything. In the previous exercise, you should have tested with equal test and the test user. The same should be done here, but instead of using users file. If you remember that slide where I said where the files was bold. Let me return. So here, in eduroam inner tunnel, first test was meant to be used with plain text users file. And when you test it, try it please. You'll see a lot of useful information. When you test it, you'll see the result of authentication and how modules are loaded and how the request that is processed is going through all the modules. And when you test that, you should just comment out the files and add LDAP instead of files, and everything should be working. Just follow the workbook. So one last thing I want to add, and this one is pretty important. As I've said already, radiusd.conf affects the entire radius daemon. While you should not change what you don't know what's doing, one thing that should be changed is in the log section, where the default installation comes with directive auth equals no. That means that Radius server won't log authentication requests. It will just log some daemon-related log information in order to be able to see which user authenticated and to later map users in case of the security incident. You should set this parameter to yes. It's all written in the exercise book once again. So find that log section, find the auth directive, change it from no to yes, and you will be able to see in the log file, you will be able to see results of authentication. So login incorrect in case of login failure, and login OK. That's by default when users connect without any problems. So once again, you should now check you should have checked the results of authentication and what's written in the log file when using equal test. And I think I've written down a few examples what's written in the log file in case of a wrong username and in case of a wrong password. And once again, we need to stress this out, that all logs must be synchronized to a reliable time source. Never mind if you're an SP or an IDP, you should keep your logs synchronized with NTP, but as NTP can also be used. And we're coming to probably the most important and the focal point of the eduroam inside an organization. So, as Miro said yesterday, eduroam is based on trust. And that trust also translates to talking to other people that are into eduroam. And when connecting to eduroam, each new federation, or actually national roaming operator, must designate a technical contact. The technical contact is the point in the people, I don't know, relations, which is responsible for dealing with the incidents and which is responsible for following the new developments and everything, and also participating in eduroam steering group meetings. So I hope to see one of you in one of next meetings, which is one is face-to-face meeting in Budapest, and the other is, I don't know, in October. But if you're on the list, you'll definitely receive an update. So please, it's not that scary. There are a lot of smart people who know what to do, who know how to help, which you can ask if you have any problems, and they're willing to help. And it can be very funny from time to time. So it's not just business. It's, I would say, a group of friendly people loving what they do and trying to make it better. I also had to mention that technical contact must be either a named individual or individuals or an organizational unit, and of course cover should be provided in case of absence of the primary technical contact, and also that technical contact must be available during work hours by email or phone. So now a bit about statistics. So national roaming operators operate the federation level radio servers, and they can count to national roaming usage, but they cannot count local usage. That's what Miro said when he showed you the statistics from FTX yesterday. IDPs can't count usage. They can only count the number of successful or unsuccessful authentications. SPs, on the other hand, can always count the local usage because they have the information needed to do that. And how they will do that depends on the server in use. So is it FreeRADIUS, Radiator, or something else? So I was also keen to show you how the line log module is working. I created an example which basically is similar to FTX module. You can use this locally. Sometimes the radius logs aren't so readable. They can be confusing. So line log module helps you to modify the log messages in a way that will be intuitive to you, to yourself. So the example in the workbook shows how, for example, to create a line log module that will act similarly as FTX, that will count, that will gather the information about the realm, the calling station ID, the result of authentication, and I'm not sure what else did I put there. I'm not sure, but everything is written down in the workbook. So yeah, if you run the server in the debug mode and have line log module activated inside post auth and authorized sections, post auth, yeah, no, only in post auth section for accept and reject responses, you will see that this module is loaded and how the formatted message will look like. You can use the default radius log file to log also the line log messages, but you don't have to. You can create a totally different file which will have that nicely written down authentication requests or responses actually, which you can maybe use to create some statistics or something that will be of interest to you. To show, for example, if you want to expand eduroam in Armenia, you could show them how many successful authentications have there been since you've done that or this, and so on. And you can basically try to show them the uptake of the service, which will probably open some doors and let you get some good equipment and maybe invest in some other software or radiator server or something else. So yeah, when you exit debug mode and run server in normal mode, you'll see basically if you don't change the default radius log file to something else, you'll see the same result of authentication, one written in default style, login OK or login incorrect, and the other will be written in the way you've defined in line log module. So other security incidents that might happen and are not directly related to eduroam. So that's authentication spamming, when a user runs as many authentication, starts as many authentication processes as it can. Disassociation of connected clients, MAC table poisoning, and these three can all be considered as generic VLAN attacks. But one thing that we all, I think, experienced a few years ago was OpenSSL vulnerability, where it actually affected all the server certificates, and then all of them had to be revoked and reissued again because of the hard bleed bug, which enabled actually reading some keying material. I'm not sure exactly what. So you should also be careful when allowing NTP servers. You should also try to protect LDAP as much as you can, so you can do it on the service side using access lists, creating unprivileged accounts which have only read privileges, and also using Linux firewall and maybe connecting to LDAP using certificates or LDAPs and so on. So I'm just going to describe how we, for example, deal with an incident. We get a lot of copyright infringement tickets in our ticketing system, where users use torrent to download a movie or something else. So we get an IP address of the infringer, or someone that's torrenting. Yeah, that's easier for me to say. And then we use logs to find the appropriate MAC address, and then by that means we find the realm of the user that created the security incident, and then we notify his home institution or his IDP that has to deal with this user. And then it depends on the institution itself. Some of them take their eduroam accounts permanently. Some suspend them for a while. But yeah, that's something you also have to work on. You should educate your users while we are in academic community. I try to ask people, would you like someone to steal your work? They all say the same. I wouldn't like someone to steal my work and use it. So that's probably the easiest way to describe how not to use torrent or other services. So my idea was, unfortunately, we didn't follow the plan as I wanted to. My idea was for this final part, hour and a half, to maybe I go through, change something small, not really break the entire VM, and then and then you should try to find out what was misconfigured or removed or modified, and then to explain what you did to remedy the problem. But unfortunately, we didn't get there. So I encourage you to try it yourself. You can organize, I don't know, a local conference, have an already prepared VM, and change something. So, for example, one of the problems that happens the most is when people configure a shared secret incorrectly. So when you read the debug mode, you see all sorts of hexa ciphers and everything, and that doesn't mean anything. When you see that, that means that the shared secret, for example, is wrong. There are situations where, for example, some of our IDPs run their server, then for example, they run their server, they log out of that console, then they go to another console and try to start again, and then a message that says a server is already running on that IP address shows, and they ask me, well, how is this possible? Then I say to them, yeah, you already probably started somewhere else that daemon and didn't turn it off before trying to run it again. What else usually? What can I remember? Well, for example, typos with passwords, usernames, something like that. So I encourage you to try it. For example, yeah, when you want to use for example, LDAP module, and you configured it in mods available, but you didn't link it in the mods enabled, and you're trying to run the server which has LDAP module defined in authorized section. It will complain. So those are the examples of what can, for example, go wrong. I cannot remember everything now, so please try that. Try to find the problems, and I guarantee that you will learn a lot more when it's not going right than when everything is going right for the first time, because then when something goes wrong, you won't be able to find out what's going on that quickly. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you managed to learn something. Of course, you can find more information at eduroam website. Regarding the monitoring, you can see everything related to ASNet and other domains or other arrows on monitor eduroam.org, especially cat eduroam.org, eduroam technical contacts list is eduroam at list.conf. I don't think you can subscribe to that one by yourself, but you get an invitation when you're promoted to a federation administrator, and if you want to follow everything that's new and that's being developed in eduroam, please subscribe to development at lists.eduroam.org. Regarding the eduroam steering group, all technical contacts from, or actually federation administrators, are invited to visit to attend the VCs, which are held once a month, I think 3rd or 4th Wednesday. In that month, eduroam development mailing list has a VC every 2 weeks, I think 3:30 Central European time. So a lot of people come together and discuss ideas, not just European constituency, but also the guys from eduroam, which is, I don't know, United States or Northern America. I think, yeah, some guys from Canadian, Henren, guys from Japan. So the time for this VC was chosen precisely in order to be able to, for everyone to participate and to see what's going on in eduroam. So hopefully, after Mira's and my presentation, you'll be able to describe eduroam service and technology, implement, so we'll see about that service provider and identity provider according with eduroam policy, and maybe deliver eduroam training to other organizations within your country. You have the materials, you'll get my presentation, and of course, if everything or there's something that you want to ask, there's my email. I think Artur and Harash have my email already, so please do not hesitate to ask me anything regarding this presentation, or if you have any other questions, please do.